Sustainability Victoria acknowledges we are hosting this session on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, the traditional owners of the land, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So welcome to the information session for the Recycling Victoria Infrastructure Fund, materials, paper and cardboard, plastics and glass for Stage 1 Expression of Interest. My name is Kelly Rossi. I'm the Recycling Industry Development Lead here at SV, and I'll be taking you through the content for today's session. With me is Kate Bolton, who will be assisting in the Q&A portion of the session. I'd also like to introduce Amanda Nielsen, Manager, Resource Recovery Infrastructure, who will shortly introduce the new policy. I advise everyone that today's session is being recorded and will be publicly available on the funding page within the coming days. An email will be sent to all email recipients who have submitted a registration of interest when it is available. The purpose of today's sessions is to give participants an overview of the Recycling Victoria Infrastructure Fund that was released as part of Recycling Victoria, a new economy policy. There will be an opportunity at the end of the presentation to ask questions. For those of you online, you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, there is the ability to post questions as we go. So please feel free to start posting your questions. Kate will help facilitate these questions at the end of the presentation. And to ensure we can get through all of the questions, we'll first take questions from the people in the audience. And if we run out of time, the online questions will be answered after the session and posted along with the recording to be made available online. So now I'll hand over to Amanda to outline the fund's role in the government's new policy.
Well, firstly, welcome. It's lovely to see some familiar faces in the room. And we are very excited to be able to present and inform you on the requirements and criteria of the funding program for the materials component of the Recycling Victoria, a new economy policy, which is basically a 10-year action plan to fundamentally transform our recycling sector, reduce waste, create thousands of jobs and set Victoria up for a more sustainable future. Recycling Victoria will drive investment in jobs and increase the waste in the recycling industry's processing capacity. The reforms will be delivered alongside investment and innovation as a comprehensive package to provide reliable services and a strong industry for the future, which you all would play a huge part in. And we'll make these services meet and exceed community expectations. Putting an end to poorly operated sites and waste stockpiling. So as you'd be aware by now, there's a number of reforms as part of the policy, 9 overall. Your curbside reform, which is basically to change the way the Victorians are recycling materials at the source, at households. To try and increase the quality of materials that are being recovered for new products, especially when we're looking at remanufacturing and reprocessing. Have a stronger recycling oversight, so the new Act and new Waste Authority to make sure that the recycling system is reliable and transparent. Conversations earlier today, I know some of you are heading off to EPA after this, so and new rules to cut waste, which are about improving the waste sorting, making sure that we pay the right amount for disposing of waste, i.e. the levies and that type of activity under the new policy. Waste to energy, to encourage investment in appropriate waste to energy facilities that will reduce the need for landfills, that will obviously also consider higher order recovery. High risk and hazardous waste management, making sure that the risks to the Victorian community and the environment for hazardous wastes and high risk sites are properly managed. As you know, SV is also have a hazardous waste solvents focused grants program out at the moment as well. Reducing businesses waste, so the new Circular Economy Business Innovation Centre to help businesses reduce the waste and generate more volume with fewer resources. Behaviour change, huge part of any change in the waste and recycling systems. which is basically helping to reduce the waste by reusing, sharing, repairing and recycling products, and having households and community understand how that works. We've also the Recycling Victoria Infrastructure Fund, materials focus, so paper, plastics, cardboard and glass, is established under the Recycling Victoria policy to respond to goal 3 of the Victoria's Circular Economy goals, which is to recycle more resources, so pretty simple. The fund's intention is to stimulate investment in priority infrastructure to support increased recycling across the state, to ensure that we have a viable local capacity and capability network and quality products that we can reuse in remanufacturing and the like. So I'll hand back to Kelly to go through the details of this particular fund. As Kelly's mentioned, there'll be time for questions at the end, and Kelly and Kate will help coordinate that with you guys. So thank you again for coming and making the time.
All right, so how did we get here? Over the last few years, we've seen several market disruptors, which have reduced the ability to effectively manage our recycles. We go back to January 2018, where China restricted import of a range of low quality materials, including plastics, paper, cardboard, which also reduced imports of these materials to have a contamination rate of 0.5% or less. Our domestic markets for paper and cardboard are at capacity, and international markets are all contracted. So particularly that low value mixed paper that arises from curbside collections. The recently announced federal government export bans will further increase our material stocks in Victoria, because we are a large exporter in Australia. And of course, we continue to have issues with the quality of our recycled materials, particularly those coming from curbside. So these disruptions have shown the volatility of Victoria's recycling system and the need to invest in the industry to increase its resilience. The fund is intended to respond to these disruptions by targeting infrastructure projects that increase the capacity and capability of Victoria's resource recovery sector, or improve the quality of materials for reprocessing and remanufacturing. This significant investment in infrastructure targets a number of outcomes, including increasing the recovery and local reprocessing of materials, increasing the use and market demand of recovered materials in remanufacturing, increasing economic development opportunities such as jobs, economic performance and growth of precincts, increasing the use of recycled content to make new products, and reducing the volume and environmental impact of waste going to landfill. So we've got large-scale grants available for infrastructure projects for the following materials: paper and cardboard, with up to 25% of capital funding capped at $8 million per project. And for plastics and glass, we have up to 25% of capital funding capped at $3 million per project. Projects for resource recovery infrastructure across multiple streams can also be considered. For example, if you have a consortium type project that can reprocess and remanufacture paper and cardboard and plastics and glass, they will also be considered. As Molly had mentioned, we do have hazardous waste grants focusing on solvents, currently out to market through an expression for interest under a separate stream of Recycling Victoria Infrastructure Fund, which can be found on our website. So our process is two-stage. This is allowing government to prioritise our outcomes and leverage investment in Victoria's resource recovery infrastructure. Both stages require applicants to meet eligibility criteria and are subject to a competitive merit-based assessment criteria. So stage 1, this application is an expression of interest and it's open to all potential applicants. The purpose of this stage is to shortlist the projects that meet the eligibility and assessment criteria for funding, so sections 5 and 6 of the guidelines. Stage 2 will invite shortlisted applicants from stage 1 to submit a detailed application and business case. The intention is to assess those projects that best achieve the objectives of the fund and recommend successful projects for funding. Indicative timing for the commencement of stage 2 is June 2020, after our EOI assessment and shortlisting recommendations have been completed. Stage 2 guidelines, including that assessment criteria and requirements for funding, will be released to successful Stage 1 applications at the completion of our Stage 1 EOI assessment. So who can apply? This fund is targeted at businesses based in or with operations in Victoria that have existing or proposed reprocessing and remanufacturing facilities and a demonstrated market demand for paper and cardboard, plastics and glass. Applications must meet the eligibility criteria in section 5 of the guidelines.
Hello.
Eligible applicants may be consortia.
Sorry, this is Ray.
Apologies for that. Eligible applicants may be consortia. However, SV only contracts with one organisation. So if you have a consortia, you must name a lead partner who will enter into the funding agreement with SV. And while the fund seeks to maximise public value and return on investment, this is not intended to discourage applications of smaller scale projects that demonstrate significant public value and which can also meet the eligibility criteria and the co-contribution requirement. Individuals, social enterprises, not-for-profits and local governments are not eligible for funding at this stage. A co-contribution from applicants is required at a minimum co-contribution of $3 towards every $1 funded by government. Funding will not be provided for applicants who have failed to adequately address an environmental or safety breach or cannot demonstrate that they are effectively working to resolve that breach. Applicants who are unable to demonstrate financial capability to undertake the project or have failed to satisfactorily progress or complete previous projects funded by SV within funding program timelines or without sufficient reason. And applicants who have received funding or support for the same activities from other sources that is not a co-funded project approved by SV. So funding from other government sources, federal, state or local, can be included, but this cannot be included as part of your co-contribution. Applicants must meet all of the eligibility criteria listed above to be considered for progression to the next stage. These will be assessed on a pass-fail basis. Applicants who have not been operating for a minimum of 2 years can apply for an exception if that applicant is a joint venture company created for the project or related entity of an established and experienced industry operator. In this case, SV may choose to accept the applicant's eligibility, but if so, SV will require that related entity or experienced industry operator to contract with SV. SV's funding agreements and terms and participation in the grant program can be found in the registration of interest email when you submit. What can we fund? So funding will be provided for infrastructure projects focused on large-scale reprocessing, remanufacturing and end-market capacity for paper and cardboard, plastics and glass. This may include infrastructure and equipment for new facilities, upgrades or expansions to support greater sorting and decontamination of recovered materials, infrastructure and equipment for new facilities, upgrades or expansions to enable reprocessing of materials to a higher quality, suitable for manufacturers and end markets, and infrastructure and equipment for the remanufacturing of recovered materials into new products. Funding will not be provided for projects that are not located in Victoria or that intend to manage materials that are primarily sourced outside of Victoria, that are being undertaken to comply with regulation or regulatory notices, have commenced construction of infrastructure before signing a funding agreement with SV, have outcomes that are not directly attributable to the SV grant funding, focus on materials not listed in this guideline, seek to extend capacity for receipt of unsorted materials, for example, infrastructure for transfer stations, seek funding for research, demonstration and development, and do not clearly demonstrate a need for government support. And most importantly, will not be commissioned and operational by 30th of March 2024. So we're looking for people that are on the ground ready to go. So we've got some costs, some project costs that we consider are out of scope. For example, we have in-kind contributions such as staff time managing project implementation, donated goods or volunteering, requests for assistance in managing cash flow, purchase of land, routine or cyclical maintenance works, ongoing operational costs such as salaries and utilities, costs of equipment not dedicated to the project purpose, for example, vehicles including front-end loaders and forklifts and the like, pre-construction activities such as site clearing, projects that involve the repair of facilities where the damage should be covered by insurance, business case development, feasibility studies or consultancy work. So section 4.2 of the guidelines provides a comprehensive outline of what won't be considered for funding, and applicants should ensure they comply with this criteria before they submit their applications. Our assessment criteria. So applications will be assessed by a panel of experts in a competitive merit-based assessment. The application seeks answers for the panel to understand the what, who, how and how much of your project. Applicants will need to answer each section of the application to enable assessment of the projects that can best meet the fund outcomes and maximise public value. For the what, we want you to describe your project and how it will deliver against the fund outcomes, increasing recovery and local processing of materials, increasing the use of recovered materials in remanufacturing, increase the use of recycled content, and reduce the volume and amount and environmental impact of waste going to landfill. We're also looking at applicants to demonstrate the project capability and viability by providing projections of their increased capacities and increased capability and viabilities in the inputs, quality of outputs and end markets. For the who, we'd like you to outline your ability to deliver the project, including your organisational capability and capacity, as well as any consortium or major subcontractor capability. We also want to know your track record in delivering projects at the same level. For the how, we're looking at your project's delivery readiness, including your ability to start that project within 90 days of being approved for funding, complete the project being commissioned and operational by 30th of March 2024, and outline any risks that you have that will impact the delivery of the project coming on time and what plans you have to address them. Project budget and leverage of government funds. We're looking at how your project maximises public value and return on investment in the industry, including evidence of your contribution ability and what difference government support will make to your project. Again, applicants will need to answer all questions in the application form. SV reserves the right to adjust rankings to achieve an overall mix of projects that will increase market diversity and or geographical location, for example, projects that increase regional investment. At stage 1, applicants must declare any compliance issues with EPA WorkSafe and their financial viability. You'll also need to declare conflict of interest and accept the terms of the funding agreement and terms of participation in grant programs to proceed. Applicants should be aware there will be further due diligence checks undertaken in stage 2 against the applicants, their project participants and related entities, environmental, safety or other regulatory performances. So our key dates are listed on screen to give you an indication of our process. The EOI closes at 3 p.m. Friday, the 3rd of April 2020. All applications must be submitted before this time to be considered eligible for assessment. Late applications will not be accepted. We encourage applicants not to wait until the last moment to submit their application to ensure there is time to work through any potential submission issues. We will commence eligibility and criteria assessment with our panel of experts as soon as the applications close. The time between receipt and decisions on applications will vary depending on a variety of factors, including the number and quality of applications received. We will endeavour to update applications about the status of their application as soon as practicable, but we cannot provide a definitive approval announcement date. So I've listed a couple of FAQs that I'm going to go through and answer before we move to answering your questions. So question, I have a project based on textiles or organics or tyres. Can I apply? So due to the conditions outlined earlier, paper and cardboard, plastics and glass were identified as immediate priority materials and are the key targets at this time. Although mentioned in policy announcements, only the material types are applicable for this round of funding. Additional funding rounds may be available at a later stage, targeting projects for other material types, such as the ones listed above. Projects in the product development space are also ineligible as we seek to increase the circularity of materials with guaranteed feedstocks or end markets. We were also asked if waste to energy projects are eligible, and the answer is no. This fund is seeking to build capability and capacity and quality products for remanufacturing. Question, will fundings exclude projects based on stockpiles? The fund is not intended to focus on projects to recover stockpiles, concentrating instead on funding projects that can leverage existing materials in the market. Projects that have secondary benefits, such as the potential to support Victoria to process existing stockpiles, will be considered. Question, can SV review a draft of my application or provide feedback? Given this is a competitive process, no, we are unable to review drafts or provide feedback on the potential merit of a project. Applicants are encouraged to familiarise themselves with section 4.2 of the guidelines to understand what won't be considered for funding and ensure that their project can meet the eligibility criteria in section 5 and assessment criteria in section 6 before applying. I will post the email address for clarifications if you need them during the process. Question, will you fund a project if it was already commenced or completed? In short, no. Retrospective funding will not be provided for projects that have already commenced or are completed at the time of signing the SV funding agreement, including projects in which construction of infrastructure has commenced before signing. However, infrastructure equipment may be purchased prior to signing the funding agreement to accommodate shipping and delivery times and prevent delays in completing the project. Question, can I submit more than one application? Yes, single businesses can submit more than one application if they have multiple projects that meet the eligibility criteria and the individual project can demonstrate how it addresses the assessment criteria and objectives of the program. For example, if there are two projects that produce different outputs, each project must be able to demonstrate an increase to capability or capacity as a standalone project. Question, I have a smaller scale project. Can I still apply? Absolutely yes. All applicants are required to meet eligibility and assessment criteria regardless of size. There is no minimum level on the material requirement. There's only a maximum cap on how much we will fund per project. Question, can I receive other government funding? Yes, you absolutely can. However, funding from other government sources cannot be included in your co-contribution. Question, why is local government excluded from funding? So the aim of this funding is to build capability and capacity and provide high quality recovered materials for reprocessing and remanufacturing. Therefore, this first round of RIVF, what we're calling it, funding, is industry focused with the expectation of co-contribution from applicants at the minimum ratio of 1:3. Additional rounds of funding may be expanded if we have them available to consider local government initiatives. So now I'm going to throw to the audience the question part of the session. And Kate will help me facilitate the questions that have come online. So if you just want to put your hand up and ask your question, if anyone has anything.
You've answered mine, textiles.
Can I get you to say your name and yeah.
Simona Price, DJPR. I wanted to know, Kelly, how big is fund you got for your disposal for this program, and if you will have more than one round?
Yes, so the government announced as part of this policy an immediate injection of 39.5 million to this fund, 28 million of which is for the materials grants and 11.5 to the infrastructure grants. So we also have committed funding from our previous fund, the RIDA Fund, Recycling in Industry Development Fund, which will be applied to this at a later date. So depending on the number of applications that we receive in this first round of funding, we may or may not award $28 million in this round, but we anticipate that we'll have additional funds available in the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions in the audience before we throw to online? Nope. Kate?
So, Kelly, I've got a couple of questions here. Is this grant available for not-for-profit community organisations?
No. So as my previous comment in regards to local funding, it's for the same logic. So we're seeking in this instance to inject into industry. So at this stage, it's only available for industry businesses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And can you still apply if you have a plan for a reprocessing site and you have the technology needed, but you're still pending a local partner?
Yes, I think the main criteria is that projects need to meet all our eligibility and assessment criteria. So if you've got a project that's going to meet those outcomes, you can certainly submit your application at this stage, but we are also looking at a project's capability to co-contribute at the 1:3 ratio. Depending on what stage your project partnership is, we suggest that you would put your application in, and there will be some time between the initial EOI assessment and our stage 2 business case assessment that you may be able to have your project partner fully established at that stage.
One thing to remember is one of the criteria is that the project shouldn't have been started as yet. And what that does mean though is that because there are delays with shipping and different things for equipment, that we are allowing people to order their equipment sooner than required. So you just need to bear that in mind as well. But as Kelly says, the best thing to do is put your expression of interest in and go and let the assessment panel assess it against the criteria if you're not sure.
And last but not least, have you selected the panel of experts that are going to be assessing the submissions? And if you're available to say so, who are they?
We're in the process of selecting, so it's going to be an interdepartmental government panel. So from our colleagues at DJPR, from Invest Victoria, from the Department of Land, Water and Planning, and there is another which I can't recall off the top of my head, but we also have another governance structure that where Recycling Victoria is having their own executive oversight group. So there will be significant number of governance over this process. Yes.
That's awesome. That's the last one from me. Thank you, Kelly.
All right. So last chance to the floor if anyone has any other further questions. Nope. Sure.
Just with the materials, can you elaborate further on plastics, paper, cardboard, glass? Plastic, a textile can be a plastic chemical. Is that something you can provide further detail? So your polyesters or your...
So we're not.
No, so it's your main three. Oh, hello, Jason. I didn't see you behind there. So your main three that are typically the are issues at the moment. So it's not into that much detail in terms of the chemical makeups of different ones. Yeah, and the ones that are stockpiling and causing the trouble at the moment. So.
Alrighty, submitting your EOI application. So the following steps we recommend going through: check if your organisation is eligible to apply, refer to the Who Can Apply section in the guideline, check your eligibility of the project, Read the terms and conditions of the SV funding agreement to ensure you can meet them. Acceptance of our terms and conditions for funding is a requirement of grant funding. Read and understand the terms of grant programs attached to the registration of interest email to ensure you can meet those also. And complete the EOI application form in the guidelines. So it's an interactive PDF document that allows you to enter text in those relevant fields. You can also attach additional documents if you need to. Complete all sections of the application form in full and submit with all applicable supporting documents, and attach a scanned signed copy of the declaration form to the application form signed by a person with delegated authority to apply for funding. Submit your application via email to grants.applications@sustainability.vic.gov.au by our deadline of 3 p.m. Friday the 3rd of April 2020. Failure to submit by the close time and date will render your application ineligible. And as I said, if you have any further questions, please email grants.inquiries@sustainability.vic.gov.au and include the subject line RVIF materials. So that concludes today's presentation, and we thank you again all for coming, and we look forward to seeing your expressions of interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.